Money Smart. I'm literally sending around to hold the day. Huh? Sorry? Good morning and welcome. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Economy Southeast Asia. Is that too loud? Is that too echoey? Fine. Yeah, it's fine. Just speak so everyone hears me.
two, 1, 2.
And then Mike.
Like, seriously? What does it matter? What's happening tonight? Oh God, my first year MIT was a disaster. I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. Because you have all these visions, like
You had a dream.
you
You had a
had a
dream.
dream, right? You had a dream. You want to go to America, and I land up there. I'm like, what is
The
this?
land of opportunity.
I was wondering why you sounded so
Swearing and stuff.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Can everyone take a seat, please, and close the doors so we can get going? Thank you. Temasek and incredible internet. As you can see, we've got a formidable audience here in attendance, which comprises global and regional investors, leading private equity firms, venture capital firms, and a foray of incredible representatives and founders and startups and entrepreneurs, as well as the international media. So thank you all for joining us here today. So hosting the vice chairman .com. Today we'll be giving you the report, which will be the first edition, and then we will be loading it online tomorrow. So please do stay to the end. So we've got an exciting event today. We will get going. Let me start by getting onto this stage Mr. Rajan Anandan, Vice President of Google, who will take you through the research findings. Mr. Rajan Anandan, welcome.
I'm hoping that all of you can spend the full day with us. We promise to make this a very, very interesting and exciting day. What I'm going to do is both Rohit Sipaimal and I are going to actually launch the research and walk you through very quickly the highlights of the research that we've done. As Joe mentioned, this is a collaboration between Google and Temasek. We embarked on this about 5 months ago with the very specific objective to both understand exactly where establish a very solid baseline. But the other thing we wanted to do was to say, how could this ecosystem evolve over the next 5 to 10 years? How big could it be? What would be the biggest drivers of growth? And then most importantly, what would it take for us to realize the full potential of the internet economy in Southeast Asia? So that's really what we embarked on doing. And his entire team at Temasek. What we're seeing today in terms of the different segments. And then Rohit is going to get up here and capture this opportunity. In terms of how we've done this, as I mentioned, we've been at this now for about 5 months. It's been a very, very intensive joint collaboration. We've leveraged Google data. As all of you can imagine, we actually have a very deep understanding of number of internet users by country, smartphone penetration by country, what are users doing online, as well as proprietary data, things like what are people searching for, what are people actually, which sites are they going to, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of part of this. The second big part of this is Temasek, startup land, proprietary research in terms of what's going on in different reports like eMarketer and so on. And then the last one, which is probably the most important, is expert interviews. We interviewed 59, we had 59 expert interviews across Southeast Asia, the leading startups. I know we have a number of them here. We've actually talked to at least probably 20-30% of this room. startups, the leading venture capitalists in Southeast Asia. And then we also actually spent a fair bit of time talking to regulators as well as telecom companies and other ecosystem players and a few policymakers just to understand exactly where we are, right? So that's really so we've leveraged many different sources to actually get to where we are. We have focused, so when we say Southeast Asia, we're referring to the 6 countries in Southeast Asia, right? So Singapore, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. Now, we do realize there are many other countries in Southeast Asia, but all the numbers that you're going to see are really focused on these six countries. So that's really what we've done. Now, let me start with a very brief overview of the region. Southeast Asia is today the 4th largest internet market in the world. Now, we've taken the liberty to define this as a market, as all of you are based in Singapore, or you've flown into Singapore from another country in Southeast Asia. We've said, look, if Singapore is a market, Southeast Asia is a market, if you look at SEA today, it's already the 4th largest internet market in the world. 260 million internet users at the end of 2015. So if you look at the stack rank of internet markets around the world, China is, as all of you know, the largest. With close to 700 million users as we speak. India has about 350 million. The US has about 300 or slightly over 300 million users. And then you have Southeast Asia at 260 million users. Now, what's interesting is both the absolute large nature of this number, 260 million internet users is a very large number. But what's also interesting is it's not just one large country. Clearly, it's actually several countries that now are beginning to have a critical mass of users, right? Indonesia with over 90 million users, Philippines with over 50 million users, Vietnam with over 50 million users, Thailand with over 40 million users, and so on. So it's actually, you're talking about several very large internet user markets. As many of you who are either building companies in the space or investing in the space knows that any country that has a large number of users becomes very interesting. So 260 million internet users in Southeast Asia, and it's growing very rapidly. SEA is the fastest growing internet region in the world. The fastest growing internet region in the world. Every month, SEA, the 6 countries in SEA, across the 6 countries in SEA, we're adding 3.8 million new internet users. Today, 124,000 new consumers in our region will join the internet for the very first time. For the very first time, right? So these are actually very big numbers, 3.8 million new internet users every month. And if you currently, what we've tried to do is look at sort of the growth rates, and we've got some modeling that we use internally on how these user bases will evolve. By 2020, Southeast Asia will have 480 million internet users. Now that, even if you say 260 million doesn't sound like a big number, I'm sure all of you would agree that 480 million is a very, very, very big number, right? So almost 500 million internet users by 2020. Now, in terms of what's really driven the growth up to this point, and then more importantly, what's going to drive the growth over the next 5 years and also 10 years, clearly the most important one is access, right? Affordable smartphones, affordable data are really, really driving this revolution. Of the 260 million internet users in Southeast Asia, 220 million of them access the internet through a smartphone, right? So pretty much, and so it's really a smartphone-driven, a mobile-driven internet economy. And of the 3.8 million new users that are coming onto the internet every month in Southeast Asia, 100% of them are mobile. So not surprisingly, all the growth in Southeast Asia is actually driven by mobile. We've also got a young population. 70% of consumers or citizens of Southeast Asia are below the age of 40. And as all of us know, young people tend to spend even more time on the internet and also do much more with the internet. GDP growth, continued growth of over 5% across SEA. This is important because the magic number in the internet space or for consumption really is $3,000, right? When an economy goes beyond $3,000 per capita, GDP per capita of $3,000, what we see is a significant acceleration in segments like e-commerce and others, because people have a lot more disposable income, and then they start spending on things. And then finally, this is still very early, but we do think as we look at the next 5 and 10 years, what we are going to see is really the emergence of mobile payments and mobile internet payment mechanisms that will actually address, that'll enable a lot of this growth. But at a simplistic level, look, it's affordable smartphones, affordable data, a young population that just loves to, doing things on the internet, and increasing income levels, right? These three things are really what's driving this growth. In 2015, the internet economy defined as e-commerce, and I'll tell you more about what's in and what's out when we define e-commerce this way, online travel, and online media, which really is digital advertising and gaming. Those sectors put together in 2015 were about $31 billion, right? So you can see the numbers here. E-commerce, $6 billion. Online travel, surprisingly, more than almost 4 times the size of e-commerce at $22 billion, and $4 billion, which is digital advertising of $2 billion, and gaming of about $2 billion. So that $31 billion is in 2015, and based on very detailed modeling that we've done, Google and Temasek together, by 2025, we see this internet economy getting to $200 billion, $88 billion in e-commerce, $90 billion in travel, and $20 billion, a combination of gaming and digital advertising. So 200 billion, as you know, is a very, very large number. Now, what I'd like to do is go through each of these segments very quickly. We actually have the detailed research, so I know some of you are actually taking notes. We do have the detailed research that we'll give that actually has about 8 levels more depth than the data that we're sharing with you, because I'm sure many of you have questions about exactly how do you come up with this number and so on and so forth. Now let's actually start with e-commerce. E-commerce, 2015, about 6 billion GMV going to 88 billion GMV in 2025. Here, let me start with what we've included and what we haven't included. What we've included is B2B and B2C e-commerce platforms, right? So these are platforms that have been created for the purpose of e-commerce, and also largely first-party product, not resale product, right? And so you can think about the leading e-commerce players in the region, whether it's Lazada, whether it's Tokopedia, both B2B, B2C. That is what's in. What is not included in the 6 billion number, and also in the $88 billion number, is e-commerce that is happening through social platforms, right? Whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Line, whether it's WeChat. As you know, our estimate today actually is that there's several $1 billion of e-commerce that is happening consumer to consumer on these social platforms. We haven't included that only because we haven't been able to size that as accurately, right? It's highly distributed, the data isn't as there. But so we think you could add maybe a couple of more $1 billion to this 6 billion. But we do think that almost all the growth is going to come from what we're calling organized platforms, for e-commerce, both B2B and B2C. So that's sort of the 6 billion number. In terms of what's driving this growth, not surprisingly, it's really 3 things, right? First is increasing income levels. As consumers in our region get wealthier, they have more disposable income. That's when really the e-commerce sort of tipping point happens. We think it's already started happening in a number of markets like Thailand already. The second is increasing internet user penetration. So if you look at China as a benchmark, 50% of internet users transact online, and I'll share with you in a minute what we've assumed would happen over the next 10 years in Southeast Asia. And third one, really very, very importantly, is the lack of organized retail in many of these Southeast Asian countries. Singapore and Malaysia are probably the anomalies where you actually have organized retail. But if you go to a country like in Indonesia or a Philippines or a Vietnam, there's really not organized retail, right? So in many ways, if you're actually living in, let's say, rural Vietnam or rural Indonesia or in any one of the thousands of islands in the Philippines, you don't have access to products. So these are the set of drivers. We've actually built a very detailed model bottom-up that we can get into for those of you that are interested, to actually build, estimate how this could evolve by country, looking at comparison countries, looking at total retail, penetration of retail, etc. In terms of how this is going to evolve, today there are about 49, let's say 50 million buyers in Southeast Asia today, right? That number we forecast will actually go up by almost 5 times to close to 250 million by 2025. So these are all the segment level estimates that you're going to see are 10-year out view. So basically 49 million going to 250 million. Now the interesting thing about 250 million is last year China had about 300 million transacting users. 300 million Chinese actually bought products online. So what we're saying here is 10 years from now, not today, but 10 years from now, Southeast Asia could have as many consumers who are going to be buying online. The other one is number of purchases per buyer. So if you look at the 49 million buyers, on average, they buy about 6 times per year. So that number will actually more than double, go to about 14 times, and we think that's actually a pretty healthy number. And finally, the average basket size will also increase, but it won't increase significantly. And the reason for that, we think, is what we are going to increasingly see, and you'll hear from some of the founders who will be up on stage, is the explosive growth in e-commerce is actually happening in categories like apparel, like accessories, where the average order value tends to be lower. So that's why you don't see as much of an increase in the average basket size. Now a slide that I'm sure, especially those of you that are visiting from other countries in Southeast Asia would love. So this is how the $88 billion e-commerce industry, again, looking out about 10 years, 2025, splits up. So not surprisingly, Indonesia is a large part of that, 46 billion. But actually, what's also very, very interesting is Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia are $8 to $11 billion markets, right? And these are very big numbers. Just to give you a sense, last year, all of e-commerce in India was only 10 billion. So basically, what we're saying is a country like, let's take the Philippines, in 10 years, which is actually not a long time if you think about it, is going to be as big as the entire e-commerce industry in India was last year, right? So these are very, very large markets. And Singapore, interestingly, will be a $5 billion e-commerce market. And 5 billion is important because the entire casino industry in Singapore is about $4 billion. So e-commerce in Singapore could actually be bigger than the casino industry in 10 years. Now, what we've done, as I mentioned, is model this at a very detailed level, and in each of these countries, both looking at total size of retail, e-commerce penetration today, what drives e-commerce in each of these markets. And what you see, the numbers at the bottom of this slide, is by 2025, e-commerce penetration as a percentage of retail, right? So if you look at Indonesia, it's 8%. A lot of it is because it's a highly distributed country, thousands of islands, lack of organized retail, and so on. And then you can see Thailand, Philippines at about 4 to 5%, with most of these other countries in the 4 to 6% range, right? So we feel actually very good about these set of numbers. But as you can see, not just Indonesia, but this is really a story about every single country being very, very large. And because the sense is, if you've got, let's say, in a country like the Philippines, which is a $10 billion e-commerce market, there's no reason why you can't build several billion-dollar businesses actually in the Philippines on e-commerce. And I'm sure we'll hear that more from the panelists who are going to come on. Now, moving on to travel. Travel we've defined as online booking of air tickets, air travel, online booking of hotels, and cabs, which is basically on-demand, the on-demand cab space. If you look at all three of these put together, and I'll share with you in a minute the breakdown by segment. If you look at all three of these together, in 2015, the online travel industry was $22 billion, right? And that will actually go to $90 billion over the next 10 years. So this has actually been one of the most interesting insights from the research, is that the online travel industry already is about 4 times the size of the e-commerce industry. And despite the explosive growth that we're going to see in e-commerce, online travel is still going to be bigger in 10 years than the e-commerce industry. And the other interesting thing about 90 billion, it is significantly bigger than the gross booking value of the 2 largest online travel firms globally today. Expedia and Priceline. Expedia is about $60 billion of gross booking value, and Expedia is about, and Priceline is about $55 billion, right? So what we are saying here is, just in Southeast Asia, the online travel market is likely to be, $90 billion 10 years from now. So if you're Expedia or Priceline or startups in the region, what you can actually do is build very, very large businesses in this space. And in terms of the different segments, airlines is the largest part of this with 40 billion. And the single biggest driver of the online booking in airlines is the large presence of low-cost carriers in the region. In Southeast Asia, 35% of air travel is on low-cost carriers. And as all of you know, low-cost carriers naturally tend to lean towards online booking, right? They're low cost, so they tend to have direct booking from customers, etc. And that 35%, by the way, compares to 13% in the rest of Asia. So if you look at Asia overall, low-cost carriers only represent about 13% of online air bookings, but in Southeast Asia, it's about 35%. So that's really what's driving a lot of that explosive growth. Hotels, 36 billion, smaller than airlines, but as many of you know, hotel bookings tends to be actually a very profitable business, especially over a period of time as you gain scale. And then cabs will be 13 billion. These are companies like Grab, like Uber, like Gojek, etc. Again, you know, very, very large space. How does online travel break up by country? Again, Indonesia at 31 billion, and this is a recurring theme that you see, not surprisingly, given the size of the country, is 31 billion of that number. But what's actually very, very interesting is Thailand is close behind at 22 billion. As I'm sure some of you know this, Bangkok is a city with the second highest number of tourists in the world, right? So we see explosive growth when it comes to travel, the travel segment in Thailand. But also, just look at the other three countries, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, again, $10 billion markets in each of these countries, right? Which is, again, very, very large. So if you look at this and you look at it either from a regional player that's planning to expand across the region, or you look at startups that could actually come from each of these countries. These are very large addressable markets. Now, moving on to a segment that we've called online media, but it's really two specific sectors. It's digital advertising and it's gaming, right? It's gaming is both PC and mobile gaming. So if you look at both of these segments put together, today about 4 billion. Digital advertising is about $2 billion across Southeast Asia, and gaming, both PC and mobile gaming, is about $2 billion. Most of that is obviously consumer paid gaming, a little bit of advertising in there. So that's $4 billion, and we project that this will actually go to 20 billion over the next 10 years, right? And in terms of how that's going to happen, in terms of gaming, it's really driven by mobile gaming, right? So mobile gaming will be about 80% of the total 9.6 billion, $10 billion number, and digital advertising will be about 10 billion. Again, this is 10 years out in terms of what the view in 2025 would be. In terms of gaming, now what's very interesting is Southeast Asia, 260 million internet users, over 150 million users actually a game in Southeast Asia. So this is actually a very gaming intensive user base. Now this $6 per user is an average across all gamers, right? So actually what those of you that are in gaming, I see Nick here, and I'm sure several of others of you who are here know that only between 1 to 3% of gamers actually play to pay. So the actual per paying user revenue is significantly higher than that. But if you actually take it across the user base, it's about $6. And what we're going to see is really two factors that will drive the growth of gaming, specifically mobile gaming. The number of mobile gamers will increase as the internet user base goes from 260 million to 480 million. So the number of people playing mobile games will significantly increase. But the other thing that will actually happen is the number of paying users will go up. If you look at actually our own business, which is the Google Play business, the lack of forms of payment, right, the inability to pay is actually the single biggest constraint in just about every one of these markets. And I know several of you are building companies to address some of those. So more users will pay, and then also what you'll see is the high value users will actually pay a lot more than what they're paying today to actually play these games. And a lot of this, by the way, is, as you know, is in-app payments, right? So mobile gaming is going to drive it, both because of increasing number of users as well, gamers as well as paying gamers, right? In terms of digital advertising, it's a $2 billion market today going to $10 billion. So online advertising, 2 billion to 10 billion. And this is sort of how it breaks up. Indonesia will be well north of $3 billion. Thailand, Philippines, or Vietnam are all in the 2 billion range. When you actually see the detailed research, we've tried to round this up. Thailand is more like 2.3, Philippines is more like 1.6. So they're not exactly the same. You'll see the detailed data when you actually get the research. But these are all very large markets. Just to give you a sense, last year, the entire digital advertising market in India was only $1 billion. So already Southeast Asia has a digital advertising market that's twice the size of India. And you can look at this basically, Thailand by itself is going to have a digital ad market that's twice the size of India that India was last year. In fact, this year, the entire digital ad market in India is only going to be about 1.3 billion, right? So explosive growth, and even in countries like Malaysia and Singapore, we'll have billion-dollar digital ad markets, obviously. Now, a lot of this growth is driven by, again, three things: more and more users getting on the internet, spending time online, the growth of e-commerce and performance-based industries. E-commerce industries use digital advertising to actually drive user acquisition. Other companies, whether it's auto companies, telecom companies, actually using digital to drive new subscribers, banks, financial services companies. So performance, the growth of performance advertising is a very big driver of the growth of digital advertising, as well as the advent of online video. Southeast Asia is among the fastest growing online video markets in the world. And as online video consumption grows exponentially, what we're going to see is branding dollars also move to digital advertising. Now those are really a quick run through of the three segments that we've actually looked at in the research in a fair bit of detail. But that's not where the story ends. As all of you know, there are many other segments or sectors that will get impacted by the internet and create enormous opportunities over the next 5 to 10 years, right? And these are the sectors, among the sectors that are going to create significant opportunities: education, entertainment. We haven't included things like video streaming and so on and so forth. Financial services, massive opportunity, starting with payments, but really going to every other aspect of financial services and healthcare. So there are going to be many other segments and sectors that will get impacted by the internet over the next 5 to 10 years in Southeast Asia, and creating billion-dollar opportunities, many billion-dollar opportunities in every one of these segments. We have not, so I wanted to actually show this just to highlight that we have not included this in our research, right? So that's the $200 billion opportunity. Now what we'd like to do is shift gears to look at what it will take to unlock this incredible set of opportunities in Southeast Asia. And it's my great pleasure now to invite up Rohit Sipai Malani, who is the Co-Chief Investment Officer of Temasek.
to basically seed around 4 venture capital firms within the region, which collectively managed to raise over $300 million. And that's been one step in the direction, but clearly we have a long, long way to go here. Now this slide gives you a little more detail by country. Now what is very impressive is that Southeast Asia has managed to generate 4 unicorns. I mean, that's a large number. Globally, you've got 150 to 200 unicorns. Southeast Asia having 4 unicorns, all based out of Singapore, I think that is quite impressive. And that's really been a story of success in Singapore. And as we have more successes, I think that will attract more capital to the region. But I think what's equally interesting is the line of companies greater than $100 million in value, which we call centaurs. By the way, how many of you have heard of the term centaurs being used for companies valued more than $100 million? Hardly anyone, but that's because I guess we made up that term. So if it does catch on, remember you heard it first here at the Google Temasek Forum, May 24th, 2016. But anyway, I think the important thing is that while there are 12 centaurs in Singapore, Indonesia has as many as 7, and each of the other markets also has a couple of centaurs. This is exciting. This is the fastest growing segment that I think is very exciting, and we want to see more and more companies come into that fold. VC investments in percentage of GDP. This is where this point I made about earlier is to relative to what we need, relative to the size of the Southeast Asia economy, we're not getting our fair share of investments. India and Southeast Asia face a number of the same challenges around infrastructure, around lack of payments infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Low internet penetration, low speeds, etc. But India penetration is almost 6 times that of Southeast Asia. If we are to achieve the $200 billion number, we need to catch up. And even if that catch-up happens in a linear fashion over the next decade, and we get to 0.25% of GDP in terms of VC investments in Southeast Asia by 2025, that will still mean $40 to $50 billion of investment into the region over the next decade. It's a large number, but I think as we see more success stories, as people see the opportunity space playing out, it's something which is very doable. So funding we talked about as being the number one challenge. It is really, truly the number one challenge to achieving that opportunity. In fact, it's exacerbated by the fact that almost all the exits that you've had in Southeast Asia have been via M&A. And M&A is always unpredictable. If we have more companies from here that successfully manage to list, and investors see IPOs and listings as an equally attractive alternative for exits, I think that in itself will attract much more capital into the region. Other key issue is talent, both developers and leadership talent. In fact, a lot of people rely on getting people from China or the US for their CXO positions for startups in the region. Third area is payments. This is pretty important because 60 to 70% of the population in Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam is unbanked, which makes it essential that the only way you can do e-commerce is through cash on delivery, which is highly inefficient and costly. You need mechanisms such as Alipay to develop out here outside the banking system to really bridge the gap out here. Fourth issue is internet infrastructure. Except for Singapore, every country in Southeast Asia has internet speeds lower than the global average of 23 megabits per second. Indonesia is about 1/3 the global average. Philippines is even much less than that. In fact, Philippines is even slower than Pakistan and Myanmar in terms of internet speeds. It's clearly something that needs to be done out there. Logistics, particularly in markets like Indonesia, which are spread across thousands of islands, this is a major challenge. Logistics costs in Indonesia is one of the highest in Asia. That's something that needs to be addressed for successful e-commerce growth. And lastly, and this is probably one of the most important things, is consumer trust. Countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines have amongst the highest rates of online fraud in the world. That does not engender consumer confidence to transact online. So a number of things to be addressed. It's not going to be an easy task, but the pot of gold at the end of the tunnel is pretty big. So I think we all need to get together and try and address this opportunity. So with that, I'll call up Rajan again, and we, I think, have 10 minutes for some questions before we move on to the next session. Rajan? I think we have a few people with mics around, so if you have any questions, just please raise your hand, and then we'll have someone come to you with a mic.
Hey, come, let's sit.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rohit. Okay, can you stand up, maybe tell us who you are?
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Diki Tarmizi from STI Indonesia. In Indonesia, we start to feel what they say, the winter is coming.
Wow, that's really that's really global warming at a whole new level.
Investment start to dry and everything. What do you think compared to what you just share in this forum? Thank you.
So it's not just in Indonesia. You know, in Silicon Valley, the amount of funding available for startups is slowing down. Same in India, same in China. I think we went through a phase where there was a lot of hype and a lot of capital, and arguably valuations did get stretched in a number of markets. So I personally think it's a phase of correction. I was just talking to one of the VCs out here, and he said already in China, you're getting to see a reversal to the bottom. You've seen a decline in number of deals, decline in valuation, but you've now seem to have hit the bottom and you're sort of seeing a reversal out there. Still not the case in Silicon Valley. So I think this is just a phase. I think for people who are there, in the long run, there will be periods of funding that will come and go, but the opportunity is really big. And I think if you look at it from a multi-year horizon, I think the opportunity will remain there, and I think the capital will come.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think what intrigues me is because as part of my region, I also cover India. India last year got $7 billion of venture funding, right? All of Southeast Asia got 1.1 billion, but as Rohit mentioned, almost half of it went to 2 companies. So what's interesting is we are, as a region in Southeast Asia, we're really at that very, very early stage, right? Of building out these internet ecosystems. And maybe India is slightly further ahead, but China is quite developed. 300 million people buy online, almost 700 million users, etc. So I think these global headwinds are clearly there. But I think it's a great opportunity. The way I look at this is, if I'm in the business of capital, I'm not, he is. This is a fantastic opportunity, because when I look at relative valuations of, let's say, even Indonesia versus any other large internet economy, they're actually very fairly valued. And then when I go to, last week I was in Vietnam, a couple of months ago I was in the Philippines, Thailand, right? These are countries where there's no capital. There very few VCs. There's no capital. Vietnam, I think, is one of the most interesting internet ecosystems in the world, right? But there's no capital. Raising Series A is like mission impossible. So when I look at things like that, I think, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to really understand the landscape and see how big this could get, and then look at the constraints, is because of this. And I think, as Rohit articulated, by far, the single biggest constraint to the growth of the ecosystem is actually capital, which I think is a great opportunity for capital providers. Other questions?
I think there's a hand there at the back.
Hi, Hian from NSI Ventures. Very interesting comparison as to the size. Just a question on velocity. I think, Rajan, you spoke about how some of the segments of Southeast Asia's size of the economies, like in e-commerce, in 10 years' time is going to be bigger than India currently. But what is India's growth trajectory? Is India going to grow as fast? Just a sense of, the acceleration that we have vis-a-vis China and India. Thank you.
I think if you, let's look at acceleration on different dimensions, right? If you look at user growth over the next 5 years, 2015 to 2020, Southeast Asia's percentage of user growth, we have this lower base than India, right? India is about north of 300 million users, is actually faster than India, right? So then if you look at Indonesia, for instance, Indonesia on a percentage growth basis on users is the fastest growing internet market in the world already, right? So if you look at user growth, that's sort of what, I always start with sort of user growth because that's the first. Then if you look at, different segments, I think they will play out differently. So e-commerce in India continues to grow. I think Southeast Asia will grow faster off a lower base than India, but will continue to grow. So if you look at the current estimates of the e-commerce market in 2020 is about 50 billion. What we've said here is that 2025 e-commerce in Southeast Asia will be 88 billion. So by 25, maybe India's 150 billion, right? So it's still going to be bigger, but growing at a slower rate. If you look at online travel, for instance, Southeast Asia today is orders of magnitude bigger than the online travel market in India already. And at 90 billion, it's going to be significantly, it's going to really be bigger than India. So depending on the segment, the views are quite different. As I said, the digital ad market in Southeast Asia last year was twice the size of India. They're both, by the way, I think Southeast Asia and India are roughly growing at the same pace. It's very high growth in terms of the digital ad market. So the answer varies by segments, but you are the fastest, we are in Southeast Asia, the fastest growing user base in the world.
And I think part of it is really, if you look at even the estimates for India, they've been significantly upsized in the last couple of years. And I think part of it has just been the amount of capital going in, which is going to accelerate the growth. So I think part of it is a chicken and egg thing. If you have the capital coming out here, I think you will see pretty rapid growth here too.
I mean, there was no way, 5 years ago, we could have ever imagined, last year was north of 10 billion GMV. If you had asked me 3-4 years ago saying India's, e-commerce, if you're going to do $10 billion of GMV, I would have said absolutely no way. But, what enabled that was obviously great entrepreneurs, capital, and the ecosystem developing. Yeah, there's a question here, front.
Hello, I'm Wang Xing, the founder and CEO of Meituan Dianping from China. We see there's a huge opportunity here, but will the market opportunity be mostly taken by global players or local players?
Go ahead. You're funding both.
Well, I guess the ad opportunity, I think Google will take a large part of that.
No, don't be silly. No way.
Look, it's interesting. I think there is, particularly in businesses like e-commerce, which are fairly local businesses, I think you do need to see, homegrown companies sort of come up to address the challenges in this market. Now, ultimately, whether they're acquired by global players or continue to grow to be large giants of their own size out here, that's something we'll wait and see. But clearly at this stage, at this early stage, there is a lot of opportunity for a lot of value creation amongst companies, startups out here. Ultimate ownership, it really depends. In some sense, you can argue it depends on really how much the ecosystem develops in terms of the infrastructure. So for example, a lot of the issues around payments, for example, or other areas in China were really addressed by large companies within China who actually built that ecosystem. Now, if you don't have the government or other aspects, other players allowing the creation of that ecosystem, and you rely on individual companies, then you need really large companies and a lot of capital to go in to sort of create that. And then maybe that gives an advantage to global players versus local players who may not be able to raise that sort of capital. But like if I take India, for example, the government's now decided to create this digital identity platform, which then allows for eKYC, allows for people to have digital lockers where the information is stored. And that's really creating the digital identity over which then individual players can form their own products and services. That makes it then easier for local companies to sort of compete out there. As against in the US, where your digital identity is really defined by Google and Facebook, et cetera, it's very difficult then for someone else to come in and sort of create that and compete with that. So part of it depends on how the ecosystem develops. I think at least in the near term, next few years, there clearly will be significant opportunity for local players.
No, I completely agree with that, right? So if you look at India today, it's, among the most competitive markets in the world because it's truly open, right? The number one and number two e-commerce players are actually Indian companies, right? If you look at travel, 1, 2, 3, 4, all Indian companies, right? So So it's, I think it really depends, as Rohit said, I mean, one, having high quality founders, which you do in the region, but also capital, because, I mean, fortunately in the last couple of years, India has gone through a phase where, capital has been an issue. Now, obviously, it is getting more challenging, as one of you pointed out. So I do think we have an opportunity for both local as well as global or regional players to build large businesses here. If you look at e-commerce, right, e-commerce of 88 billion, let's say the top player has 30% minimum, right? So that's about 25 billion, which is actually roughly the size of JD.com. So essentially, whoever wins this is going to create JD in the next 8 to 10 years, at a minimum, right? So I think it's going to be a combination of both. And as many of you know, I know there are many of you from visiting from Indonesia. I mean, building a large e-commerce business in Indonesia is quite tough, and being local has a huge competitive advantage to being able to do that. Yeah, there's a question back there.
Hey, my name is Vu, and I have a question. So looking at the startup scene in Southeast Asia, one thing that we see is lacking compared to other regions, like Silicon Valley or even China and India, is the lack of innovation, right? We haven't really seen a lot of truly innovative products that coming out of the Southeast Asia that can win in the global market. What would you see need to happen for those startups to succeed in the area, and will you see that coming anytime soon?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then you can add. I think it's a great observation. By the way, I mean, I think, even in India today with, all this funding that has gone in, right, we still have a long way to go in terms of truly innovative, first to the world, ideas coming out of India. I mean, I can probably name them on one hand, right? So this is a phase of evolution, right? In many ways, look, my view is go and first build the businesses that are obvious, because we've got like $200 billion of obvious opportunities that are going to be there, right? And then over time it'll happen. Look, it'll happen when we have second generation, third generation founders, when we have a better, we have an even larger user base, and so on and so forth. Now, all this being said, by the way, at just after lunch today, we have a panel of very early stage companies that are doing very interesting things in Southeast Asia. I was in Vietnam last week. There's a startup called Elsa. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. It is one of the most interesting language learning startups in the world, right? Helps Vietnamese improve their English pronunciation using sort of voice technology, right? I mean, that's like really, really interesting. And I think during the panel, you'll see a whole bunch more, right? So I think it's just a phase of evolution. Right? This is we're still very, very early in this ecosystem. As the ecosystem gets better, as we get more seasoned founders, as our engineering and product talent kind of improves, we're gonna start seeing it, right? I mean, in Philippines, which again is a market which is going to be 10 billion e-commerce, 10 billion travel, so going to be a very large market. I'm sure we'll hear this from the next panel. Is raising capital is very difficult. There's a company called Pawn Hero, which I think is one of the most, they basically take the pawning industry, not pawn, that kind of pawn, but, where you actually, actually think is one of the most innovative financial services startups I've seen in the world, right? Coming out of the Philippines, right? And so look at companies like this and, I get pretty excited, but it's still very early days. I don't think, we shouldn't build companies just for the sake of innovation. I think we should go after real big markets where the opportunities lie. I don't know, Rohit, whether you want to...
No, I agree with that. I mean, a few years ago, that's what people would have said about China, right? That all the companies out there are copycats of business models, in the US and elsewhere. But I mean, today you see innovation in China, which is basically being exported to other markets in the world. So I think it's exactly a stage of evolution that every economy and country goes through.
Yeah.
So I think we're...
Let's take the last question, and then we'll have to wrap. There's a question all the way at the back.
Hello, I'm Chloe Cho from Channel News Asia. There's no question that this part of the region continues to grow, but I wonder whether on a 10-year horizon, your projections are a little bit optimistic in light of the fact that a lot of people are increasingly wondering whether valuations are getting a little bit heady. So if that is the case, the difference might be compared to the previous dot-com bust, since a lot of the companies are not listed, we could be heading towards a much slower grind lower. What do you think about that?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's a question, the valuation question I sort of talked about a little earlier. We're having that question come up in multiple markets. But wherever you see, I think initially there's a period where funding dries up because people start believing that they're worth billions and billions of dollars, because of what they've seen in the past. And there's a gap between price that investors are willing to pay and what entrepreneurs are willing to accept. But there is a clearing mechanism through which ultimately that will settle. And it may go through some period where you have a slowdown in sort of capital investment, but that will get sorted out. Fundamentally, the need is there and the opportunity is there. So the value creation opportunity is there. I think you will get to a clearing price. I see this as a phase. I don't see this impacting really the attractiveness in the long run of the opportunity that we've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if there's, I think this is sort of a mid case, right? It's not an optimistic. I mean, our view is, as you know, Google and Temasek, our teams, we've been working at this, and we, for 5 months, as I mentioned, we think this is not the optimistic case. You could actually paint a picture that is, much bigger than this. I mean, if you look at it, right, e-commerce, what we're saying is across Southeast Asia, e-commerce gets to about 6% of retail penetration. I mean, in 10 years from now, right, when 75 to 80% of all SCA consumers are going to be on the internet. I mean, that's actually a very, I mean, if you look at 6%, that's a very conservative estimate, especially in a region where there's no organized retail, etc.
Yeah.
But again, I think coming back to what Rohit mentioned, the number one constraint is going to be funding. So we do need to have a large amount of capital actually flowing into the region. Okay, I think with that we'll wrap up. Thank you again for coming. I also want to thank Rohit and this terrific team from Temasek, as well as our Google team for this great research. I do hope that all of you will stay throughout the day. We've got some very, very exciting panels lined up.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rohit and Rajan, for illuminating and opening our eyes to the 200 billion opportunity. And now it's our chance to listen to some of Southeast Asia's most successful and respected, in fact, the unicorns that we referenced earlier. So let me invite onto the stage Max Bittner, who is CEO of e-tail giant Lazada. He's also got a plane to catch, so he might have. Please come on. Followed by Hui Ling, Tan, and CEO. GOOGLESingapore.
Coming, get the energy up again in this session. So we wake all of you up. So huge amount of pressure on the panel, but it's fantastic being with all of you on stage. I mean, you guys have actually successfully surpassed all the challenges that our previous speakers spoke about and built great businesses here. So I wanted to sort of dig a little bit into your experiences, understand how you think about the region, how you think about the growth opportunities. What's your view of Southeast Asia, and how are you betting on the region?
No, it's a great question. And first of all, thank you, Caesar, for the opportunity to be here in this room. And it's wonderful to see a lot of very familiar faces in the audience. A great pleasure and delight to be here. I think in a single sentence, we feel like Southeast Asia is going to be the next India or China. Scaled down, I think, for the size of its GDP and its population, but not scaled down in terms of the ambition and the aspirations. There was a question asked in the earlier discussion by the gentleman who founded. It's a matter of having the right business models. It's a matter of pulling together all of Southeast Asia, not any one country, not certainly Singapore by itself. And I think it's a matter of management process and management approach. And there, until the last 4 or 5 years, hadn't been companies in Southeast Asia that modeled themselves explicitly on Google, modeled themselves explicitly on Facebook in their glory days. But more importantly, a content business, which is similar to Tencent, an e-commerce business, which is very similar to Taobao, and eventually Tmall over time. And what's been exciting for us is the first business is the hardest. You spend enormous amounts of effort learning about Indonesia, getting into every little village, figuring out how Vietnam works. The second business is a little easier, and the third, today,
Thomas, Max. Look at it. That.
and rather looked at how picture, but we've tried to not get scared off by that and kind of rather figured out, you know, there's things which need to be local and there's things we can centralize and find the economies of scale, and to then use those economies of scale to invest in the market, you know, ahead of what I would say the efficient investment frontier. And I think, you know, Grab Taxi obviously has a very, Grab, same you know, approach to it. And I think that's very important to really attract global talent into the region.
No, that's fascinating. You know, you mentioned Grab, so where you're also in, Huiling, you're in a number of countries.
Yeah.
How do you think of the region and how you decide which countries and how you prioritize across them?
I think a couple of folks have touched on this, but I want to call it out explicitly, right? Southeast Asia is not a monolithic block, right? Especially behaviors. So in order to win Southeast Asia, what we've actually learned is that, and therefore build that. But what enabled us to get here 36 taxis as well, delivery services, carpooling. Why? Because that's what our customers are telling us.
That's a fascinating story. You know, we at Google keep following what you guys have done across the region, all of you. Wanted to turn to you, Nix, a little bit, because you're slightly interesting. You've actually gone public with a company, and hear from you how you think about the region, particularly, and also, of course, your experience in Philippines.
So, Surpass is most unique, nor had organically grown the business over the year. 2014, December of 2014, my partners and we decided to take the company public for a very interesting reason. I would talk to a lot of the VCs in the region, and I noticed that they would always compare ourselves, based out of the Philippines, to some of the other companies in the region. Have had any experience investing in tech companies. But what I discovered when I peeked under the hood was that there were about 500 different emerging market and frontier funds that invest in Southeast Asian listed companies. And they didn't really have any consumer tech company to choose from. So that's why I decided I'm going to find a way to list here, natively find identify which navigate around.
Sorry, finding a unique funding opportunity to get over the funding gap. The three of you have raised a lot of capital. How have you gone about doing that?
Who starts?
Why don't you start, Max?
You know, I think we've been very lucky, to be honest, to get access to a lot of capital very early on. And in the end, you know, the opportunity to, in some sort of goes around to do and kind of overpromise. Vision is and stick to that and execute on that. And I think that's made it then over the years easier. I think the second thing which allowed us, you know, to tie into, you know, that kind of pool of capital that is out there is again, people, you know, Southeast Asia is not one country, it's not monolithic, it's harder to understand. I've made this joke regularly, so it's a bit boring probably, but it's so complex to build the Excel model. I prefer to just build the Excel model for one country. It's easier because I can just benchmark it with another country. So there is that level of complexity, and I think you just have to be able to guide investors through the story behind.
It's interesting, after 10 years at General Atlantic, and then in the last few years running Southeast Asia for GA, to then as his business partner, I think for us there are humility. This is about building partnerships. It's ratios and the dynamics between dollars use those same templates. So we run IRR confidence of knowing not
Of course, we need good already shared. From your own internal teams, we
listed company. Actually haven't heard of other changes that actually did a follow on. Media and all of these sites, suddenly the number of connections that they will make will be in the several hundreds. Suddenly the number of services and products that they will have access to via the Shoppees and the Lazadas and the Grabs of this world will be in the millions of items versus the few hundred or thousands of items for the local pyramid in Southeast Asia. And that they must actually really be suddenly
impacted humanity. It's having a huge amount of that.
individuals who are so
years ago, the $5 million overall percent market share, miss a bit the.
So I think it's just the way they think about the ecosystem, the way it's important to kind of ecosystem